The wind howled through the narrow streets of Cedar Ridge, carrying with it a mixture of dust and sleet that cut through clothing like tiny knives. February 1873 had been cruel to the frontier town, and crueler still to those who had no walls to shield them from its fury. Margaret Donnelly pressed herself against the side of Morrison's general store, trying to find some shelter from the storm. Her dress, once a respectable brown wool, hung in tatters around her thin frame. The hem was caked with mud from weeks of walking, and the sleeves bore tears from sleeping rough in thorny brush. She had walked for 3 days straight to reach this town, the last of her money spent on stale bread 2 settlements back. "Please," she called out to a passing woman wrapped in furs. "I'm looking for work. Any work. I can clean, cook, tend animals." The woman pulled her shawl tighter and hurried past without acknowledging Margaret's existence. It was the same response she'd received a dozen times already this morning. Margaret's stomach cramped with hunger, but she pushed the feeling aside. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She stumbled toward the saloon, where a group of men stood smoking beneath the overhang. "Excuse me, sirs," she began, her voice hoarse from the cold. "I'm seeking employment. I'll sleep in the barn. Just give me work. I don't need much." "Would you look at this?" One of the men, a portly fellow with tobacco-stained teeth, nudged his companion. "Another beggar woman. Town's crawling with them lately. Probably got herself in trouble and her family threw her out," another suggested, eyeing Margaret's ringless fingers. "No decent woman travels alone." "I'm a widow," Margaret said quietly, though it was only half true. Her husband had left her, not died, but the shame of abandonment was worse than widowhood in these parts. "Sure you are," the first man laughed. "And I'm President Grant. Move along, woman. We don't need your kind here." Margaret's cheeks burned despite the cold. She turned away, blinking back tears that would freeze on her lashes if she let them fall. Across the street she spotted the livery stable. Perhaps the owner would be more sympathetic. The stable was warm and smelled of hay and horses. Margaret found the proprietor, a grizzled man named Jasper, mucking out stalls. "Sir, I'm looking for work," she said. "I'm strong. I can clean stalls, feed horses. I'll sleep here in the barn if you'll have me. I don't need wages. Just food and shelter." Jasper barely glanced up. "Can't help you. Already got a stable boy. Besides, wouldn't be proper, woman sleeping in my barn. People would talk." "People already talk," Margaret said, desperation creeping into her voice. "Please, I have nowhere else." "Not my problem." He went back to his work, dismissing her. Margaret stumbled back onto the street. The storm was worsening, and she could barely feel her fingers anymore. She made her way to the church at the end of town. Surely they would show Christian charity. But Reverend Whitman stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "I'm sorry, but we can't take in every stray that wanders through. The church funds are for members of our congregation." "I'll join your congregation," Margaret offered quickly. "I'll attend every service. Without a proper residence or family?" "I think not. Perhaps you should return to wherever you came from." There was nowhere to return to. Margaret's father had made that clear when he'd discovered her husband had abandoned her. "No daughter of mine will bear such shame," he'd said, closing the door in her face. She wandered back toward the center of town, her movements growing sluggish. The cold was seeping into her bones now, making her thoughts fuzzy. She'd heard that freezing to death was peaceful, like falling asleep. Perhaps that wouldn't be so terrible. A crowd had gathered near the general store, their voices carrying over the wind. Margaret approached, drawn by the commotion. "Don't care if he does trade here regular," someone was saying. "Them Indians got no business walking our streets like they own the place." Through the crowd, Margaret caught sight of what had caused the stir. A man stood near the store entrance, and he was unlike anyone she'd ever seen. He towered over everyone else, surely close to 7 feet tall, with shoulders broad as an oak beam. His hair was black as coal, worn long in the Apache way, and his face was all sharp angles and shadows. He wore a mixture of traditional dress and white man's clothing, leather leggings, a wool coat, boots that had seen many miles. But it was his eyes that made Margaret's breath catch. Dark as winter nights, they swept over the crowd with a gaze that seemed to see everything and judge it all as insignificant. When those eyes passed over her, she felt a jolt of something. Recognition? Understanding? She couldn't say. "Joseph Byrne says he caught him looking at his daughter," a woman whispered loudly. "These savages got no control over their base natures." The Apache man, for that's what he clearly was, stood perfectly still, like a mountain that had decided to visit town. He seemed utterly unbothered by the hostility surrounding him, as if their words were no more significant than the wind. Margaret found herself studying him. His clothes were clean, well-maintained. His hands, visible where they emerged from his coat sleeves, bore the calluses of hard work, but were steady, calm. This was no vagrant or troublemaker. This was a man who had simply come to town for supplies, same as anyone else. "Someone ought to run him off," a voice suggested from the crowd. "You want to try, Harold?" Another responded with nervous laughter. "Look at the size of him." Margaret swayed on her feet, the cold and hunger finally overwhelming her. She reached out to steady herself against a hitching post, but her frozen fingers couldn't grip properly. The world tilted, and she felt herself falling. She never hit the ground. Strong arms caught her, held her upright with surprising gentleness. She looked up, dazed, into those midnight eyes. Up close, she could see they weren't black at all, but the deepest brown, like rich earth after rain. The crowd fell silent. The Apache man studied her for a moment, taking in her torn dress, her frost-pale skin, the desperation written in every line of her body. Then, without a word, he shifted his grip, one arm supporting her back, the other beneath her knees, lifting her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. "Put her down," someone shouted. "You can't just—" The man's gaze swept over the crowd again, and something in his expression made them step back. Not fear exactly, but a recognition of something immovable, inevitable as the mountains themselves. He began walking, carrying Margaret through the parting crowd. She should protest, she knew, should demand to be put down. But the warmth of his body was the first real heat she'd felt in days, and she found herself curling instinctively closer. "Where's he taking her?" Voices followed them. "Someone should stop him!" "You stop him then." But no one moved to interfere. They watched, horrified and fascinated in equal measure, as the giant Apache carried the raggedy white woman away from their midst. Margaret's last coherent thought before the warmth and exhaustion pulled her under was that his coat smelled of wood smoke and pine, clean scents that reminded her of better times, of home before it had all gone wrong. She let her head rest against his shoulder and allowed herself, for the first time in weeks, to stop fighting. Behind them, the crowd burst into furious gossip, but the Apache man never looked back. He walked with steady purpose through the storm, carrying his unexpected burden as if he'd been waiting for exactly this moment, exactly this woman, to appear in Cedar Ridge on this bitter February day. The wind continued to howl, but Margaret no longer heard it. She was already slipping into the first real sleep she'd had since her world fell apart, carried by a stranger whose kindness came without words, without conditions, without judgment. In Cedar Ridge, they would talk about this day for years to come. The day the Apache giant carried away the beggar woman, the day their neat understanding of how the world should work was challenged by a single act of inexplicable compassion. But for Margaret, it was simply the day her life began again. Margaret woke to warmth and the crackling of fire. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented. The last thing she remembered clearly was falling in the street, then strong arms catching her, lifting her. She opened her eyes slowly, taking in her surroundings. She was in a cabin, modest but well-built, with thick log walls chinked against the weather. A fire burned steadily in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the room. She lay on a pallet near the fire, covered with several blankets that smelled of sage and wood smoke. The Apache man sat across from her, working on something with his hands. In the firelight, she could see his face more clearly. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 35, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw. His hands moved with practiced precision, carving something from a piece of wood. She tried to sit up, and he glanced at her, setting aside his work. "Water," he said, his voice deep and measured. It wasn't a question. He rose and brought her a cup, helping her sit up enough to drink. The water was cool and clean, the best thing she'd tasted in weeks. She drained the cup gratefully. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rough. He nodded and moved to a pot hanging over the fire. The smell that wafted from it made her stomach clench with hunger. He ladled something into a bowl. Stew, she realized, and brought it to her. Margaret's hands shook as she took the bowl. The first spoonful brought tears to her eyes. It was simple fare: venison, root vegetables, wild herbs, but after days of near starvation, it tasted like a feast. He watched her eat with those dark, thoughtful eyes, then returned to his carving. She studied him as she ate, trying to understand why he'd helped her. In town, they'd treated him with suspicion and contempt. Yet he'd shown her more kindness than any of them. "Why?" she asked when she'd finished the stew. He looked up from his work. "Why what? Why did you help me?" He was quiet for a long moment. "You needed help." It was that simple for him, she realized. No questions about her past, her reputation, what she might have done to end up alone and destitute. She needed help, so he helped. "They'll talk," she said. "In town, they'll say terrible things about you, about me. They already say terrible things." His tone was matter-of-fact, without bitterness. Margaret looked down at her hands, still clutching the empty bowl. "I have nothing, no money, no family, no—" Her voice broke. "I can't repay you. Did not ask for payment. But I can't just— I should go. You've been kind, but—" "Storm," he said, nodding toward the door. Indeed, she could hear the wind howling outside, rattling the shutters. "Stay tonight. Decide tomorrow." He rose and took the bowl from her hands, moving to a basin to wash it. Margaret watched him, noting how he moved through the small space with quiet efficiency. Everything had its place: tools on hooks, supplies on shelves, firewood stacked neatly by the hearth. "What's your name?" she asked. He glanced at her. "They call me Tom. Tom Crow Feather." "Your real name?" A slight smile touched his lips. "Real enough for white men's town." "I'm Margaret. Margaret Donnelly." He nodded, acknowledging this information without comment. As the evening wore on, Margaret found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. Tom worked quietly on his carving, occasionally adding wood to the fire. He'd given her a sleeping space by the hearth, she realized, while he sat on a simple stool. "I could sleep in the barn," she offered. "I don't mind. I've slept in worse places." He shook his head. "No barn, just this." He gestured to the cabin. "Then where will you—" He indicated a bedroll in the corner. "I've slept in worse places, too." The wind picked up outside, and Margaret shivered despite the warmth of the fire. She pulled the blankets closer, remembering the crowd's angry faces, their whispered accusations. "They think you're dangerous," she said quietly. "I am dangerous." He said it simply, without boast or threat. "To those who would harm what is mine." "Am I yours now?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He looked at her directly then, those dark eyes unreadable. "You are no one's. But under my roof, you are under my protection." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes again. Protection. When was the last time anyone had offered her that? "My husband left me," she found herself saying. 8 months ago, just disappeared one day. Left me with debts, no money, nothing. My father said I'd shamed the family, said a woman who couldn't keep her husband was no daughter of his. The words poured out like water from a broken dam. I tried to find work, but everywhere I went, they knew. Small towns, they all talk. They all knew I was the woman whose husband preferred the road to her company. Tom continued carving, but she could tell he was listening. "I thought Cedar Ridge would be different. Bigger town, more people. Maybe someone would need help badly enough not to care about my past." She laughed bitterly. "But it's the same everywhere. A woman alone is either pitied or suspected, never just accepted." "White men's ways," Tom said after a moment. "Apache way is different. Woman alone is not shameful, sometimes necessary, sometimes strong. I don't feel strong. Walked 3 days in storm, no food, no shelter, still standing." He shrugged. "That is strong." Margaret considered this. She hadn't thought of it as strength, just desperation. "What will people say?" she asked. "A white woman staying with an Apache man. Whatever they want to say, their words change nothing. They could make trouble for you. They could try. There was something in the way he said it, calm but final, that made her believe him. This was a man who'd faced trouble before and survived it. A particularly fierce gust of wind shook the cabin, and Margaret was grateful for the solid walls around her. Tom rose and checked the door, making sure it was securely barred. "Tomorrow," he said. "If storm breaks, I go to town. Trade pelts. You decide then, stay or go. And if I stay," he returned to his seat, picked up his carving, "then you stay. But what would I do? I need to work, to earn plenty of work. Garden needs tending, clothes need mending, game needs dressing." He glanced at her. "If you want work." Margaret felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Yes, I want to work." He nodded, satisfied, and returned to his carving. They sat in companionable silence as the storm raged outside. Margaret found herself drowsing, warm and fed for the first time in so long. Just before sleep took her, she heard Tom moving around the cabin, banking the fire, settling onto his bedroll. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "Sleep," was his only response. Margaret closed her eyes, listening to the wind and the settling of the fire. She thought about the people in town, their harsh words and harder hearts. They'd warned her about the dangerous savage, but here she was, safer than she'd been in months, treated with more dignity than any of them had shown her. Tomorrow, she would have to decide. Return to town and face their judgment, try again in another place where she'd be just another beggar woman, or stay here in this simple cabin with a man who asked no questions, made no judgments, offered only shelter and honest work. But tonight, she didn't have to decide anything. Tonight she could just rest, warm and safe, while the storm raged outside. For now, that was enough. As sleep finally claimed her, her last thought was of Tom's hands as he carved. Steady, patient, creating something beautiful from raw wood. Perhaps, she thought drowsily, broken things could be reshaped into something new. Perhaps she could be too. The wind continued its assault on the cabin walls, but inside, two souls found quiet refuge from the storm. One who had offered shelter without being asked, and one who had almost forgotten such kindness could exist in the world. The morning came with a profound silence. The storm had passed, leaving the world wrapped in white. Margaret woke slowly, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar warmth and comfort. Then memory returned. The Apache man, Tom, the cabin, the kindness she'd thought extinct in the world. She sat up, looking around. Tom was already awake, standing by the window, studying the snow-covered landscape. In the morning light, she could see the cabin more clearly. It was sparse but clean, everything arranged with careful precision. Tools hung on pegs, furs and blankets folded neatly on shelves. A rifle stood in the corner, well-oiled and ready. "Good morning," she said softly. He turned, nodding. "Morning. Coffee?" "Yes, please." He poured from a pot that had been warming by the fire, handing her a tin cup. The coffee was strong and bitter, but she welcomed its warmth. "Storm passed," he said. "Trail to town will be clear by afternoon." Margaret's stomach tightened. The decision she'd pushed away last night now loomed before her. She sipped her coffee, trying to organize her thoughts. She began, then stopped. How could she explain the war inside her? Part of her knew she should leave, try again somewhere else. But a larger part, the part that was so tired of running, of begging, of being looked at with contempt, wanted desperately to stay. Tom moved about the cabin, preparing breakfast. He worked with the same quiet efficiency she'd noticed the night before, every movement purposeful. He set a plate before her, fried bread and dried meat. Simple fare, but her mouth watered. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than just the food. They ate in silence. Margaret found herself studying the cabin more closely, trying to imagine herself here. It was so different from the life she'd known. No proper furniture, no decorations save for a few items that looked ceremonial hanging on one wall. But it was warm, safe, and she was being treated with respect. "If I stay," she said suddenly, "what would people in town say? What would they do?" Tom considered this. Talk. Always talk. Maybe make threats. And nothing. My land. My business. But they could make trouble for you. You're trading? Have traded there 10 years. They need my furs, my meat. Business is business. Margaret thought about this. It was true. Even yesterday, despite their hostility, no one had actually prevented him from trading. They needed what he offered, even if they despised him for what he was. I'm not sure I'm strong enough, she admitted, to face their judgment. Not asking you to face them. Asking if you want work, roof, food. He gestured around the cabin. This is not town. She understood then. He wasn't asking her to brave their censure daily. The cabin was isolated, probably miles from Cedar Ridge. She could have shelter, work, dignity, without having to endure their stares and whispers. Yes, she said, the word coming out stronger than she expected. I want to stay. He nodded, as if he'd expected this answer. Good. Much work to do. He showed her around the cabin then, explaining the daily routines. Water came from a spring behind the cabin, protected by a small spring house he'd built. Firewood was stacked under a lean-to. There was a root cellar for storing vegetables and preserved meat. A small shed held tools and supplies. Garden is there, he said, pointing to a cleared area now buried under snow. Come spring, needs planting. You know garden work? Yes, I had a kitchen garden back. She trailed off. Back when she had a home, a husband, a life. Yes, I know gardening. Good. Also, trapline needs checking. Can teach you to skin, prepare pelts. Margaret nodded, though the thought of skinning animals made her queasy. But she'd asked for work. She wouldn't be choosy now. The day passed quickly. Tom showed her where things were kept, explained his systems. Everything had an order, a logic to it. Margaret found herself impressed by how well organized everything was. This was no primitive dwelling, but a carefully maintained home. As afternoon approached, Tom prepared to leave for town. Need supplies, he said, pulling on his heavy coat. Be back before dark. Is there anything I should do while you're gone? Rest, still weak from cold, hunger. Tomorrow is soon enough for work. He paused at the door, looking back at her. Bar door behind me. Don't open for anyone. A chill ran down her spine. Are you expecting trouble? No, but caution is wise. After he left, Margaret did as instructed, dropping the heavy bar across the door. The cabin felt different without him. Smaller somehow, though his absence made it seem larger. She moved about slowly, familiarizing herself with a space that would be her home. Home. The word felt strange. Could this simple cabin really become home? She found his carving from the night before on a shelf. A bird, wings spread in flight. The detail was extraordinary, each feather carefully rendered. She ran her fingers over it, marveling at the skill required. Time passed slowly. Margaret tended the fire, heated water to wash herself properly for the first time in weeks. She found a small mirror and winced at her reflection. Her face was gaunt, her hair tangled and dirty. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who'd been living rough. She was attempting to comb out her tangled hair when she heard horses approaching. Her heart hammered as she moved to the window, peering out carefully. 3 riders had stopped in the yard. She recognized one, Deputy Bryson from town. The other 2 were strangers, but their intent was clear from their postures, the way they scanned the cabin. Hello, the house, Bryson called. We know you're in there, woman. Saw the Apache leave for town. Margaret stayed silent, Tom's warning echoing in her mind. Come on out. We're here to help you. Take you back to civilization where you belong. Still, she said nothing, though her hands trembled. Don't be foolish, woman. You think that savage has good intentions. You're nothing but a plaything to him. Come out now while you can. Go away, Margaret called, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. I'm fine where I am. You don't know what you're saying, one of the other men called. They got ways of controlling a woman's mind. You're not thinking clear. I'm thinking perfectly clearly. Now leave. This is private property. Bryson laughed, an ugly sound. Property? You think the law recognizes an Indian's claim to property? Open this door, or we'll open it for you. Margaret's mind raced. The door was solid, barred, but 3 determined men could probably break it down eventually. She moved to where Tom kept his rifle, but realized she didn't know how to use it. Even if she did, could she actually shoot someone? Last chance, woman. Come peaceful or... The sound of a rifle shot split the air. Not from the cabin, from somewhere outside. The horses danced nervously. That's far enough, gentlemen. Margaret recognized Tom's voice, though it carried an edge she hadn't heard before. Now, Tom, Bryson started, we're just trying to help the lady. She's clearly not in her right mind, staying out here with... The lady has made her choice. You will respect it. Or what? You'll shoot a deputy? That's a hanging offense, boy. Self-defense is no crime. You are on my land, threatening my guest. Leave now. Margaret peered out the window again. Tom stood at the edge of the clearing, rifle steady in his hands. Even from here, she could see the calm readiness in his stance. This was not a man making idle threats. This isn't over, Bryson said. We've got laws about white women and Indians, moral laws, if not legal ones. You're corrupting her, and the good people of Cedar Ridge won't stand for it. The good people of Cedar Ridge let her starve in their streets. Their morality means nothing here. The truth of those words seemed to hit home. Bryson's face reddened, but he turned his horse. You'll regret this, both of you. Mark my words. They rode off, and Margaret sagged against the wall, relief making her knees weak. She heard Tom's footsteps approaching and quickly unbarred the door. He entered, setting his rifle back in its place, then studying her with those dark eyes. You stayed, he said. You told me to bar the door and not open it for anyone. A slight smile touched his lips. Good. He had a pack with him, which he set on the table. Supplies, and this. He pulled out a bundle of fabric. For you. Dress needs mending, but warm. Margaret unfolded it. A simple woolen dress, well-made if plain. Her eyes filled with tears. I can't pay. Already said, not asking for payment. You need clothes for winter. This is practical. She clutched the dress to her chest, overwhelmed. Even this simple kindness, after months of cruelty and indifference, was almost too much to bear. They'll come back, she said. Maybe, probably. He unpacked the rest of the supplies. Flour, salt, coffee, ammunition. Changes nothing. Why are you doing this? Really? He paused in his unpacking, considering. Long ago, my mother was cast out by her people, married white trapper against tribal law. When he died, she had nowhere. No one would help. Not Apache, not white. She starved to death when I was 12 winters. Margaret felt her heart constrict. I'm sorry. Not your fault. But I remember. Remember how they looked at her, like she was nothing. Remember begging for someone, anyone, to help. He resumed unpacking. You needed help. I could give it. Simple. But it wasn't simple, Margaret knew. Nothing about this was simple. Yet sitting here, in this warm cabin with this quiet man who asked nothing of her but honest work, she felt more at peace than she had in years. Thank you, she said again, knowing the words were inadequate. He nodded, understanding anyway. Tomorrow, work begins. Tonight rest. Real rest this time. As evening fell and they shared another simple meal, Margaret thought about the men who'd come, their threats and accusations. She thought about town, where she'd been nothing but a beggar woman, an embarrassment, a problem to be solved or ignored. Here, she was a guest. Tomorrow, she'd be a worker. Perhaps someday, she might be something more. But for now, this was enough. This cabin, this silence, this unexpected sanctuary with a man who understood what it meant to be outside, looking in. 2 weeks passed in relative peace. Margaret settled into the rhythm of life in the cabin, finding comfort in the daily routines Tom had established. She mended clothes, prepared meals, learned to check the simpler trap lines close to the cabin. Her hands, soft from her previous life, grew calloused but capable. The whispers started during Tom's next trip to town for supplies. He returned later than usual that day, his expression darker than she'd seen it. He set down his pack with unusual force. What happened? Margaret asked, looking up from the rabbit pelt she'd been learning to scrape. Nothing of importance. But the tightness in his jaw said otherwise. She didn't press. She'd learned that Tom would share what he wanted in his own time, but over dinner, he finally spoke. They're calling you names in town, ugly names. Margaret's hand stilled on her cup. What kind of names? Don't matter what kind. Words of small, frightened people. Tell me. He met her eyes. Barn rat. Said you'd sleep anywhere for food, like animal in barn. Other things, too. Worse things. Margaret felt heat rise in her cheeks, but it was shame, not anger. Because hadn't she said it herself? Hadn't she begged to sleep in barns? Also calling you ruined woman. Say no decent man would have you now living here with Apache. They're not wrong, she said quietly. I am ruined. My husband left me. My family cast me out. I begged in their streets, and now I'm living with a man who isn't my husband. By their standards, I am ruined. Tom's eyes flashed. Their standards mean nothing. You work hard. You harm no one. That is not ruined. But the damage was done. The peace she'd found began to crack. She found herself thinking about the townspeople, imagining their sneers, their whispered conversations. When she looked in the mirror, she saw what they must see. A fallen woman, a creature without morals or shame. The next day brought confirmation of the town's judgment. Margaret was hanging laundry when she heard horses. Her heart sank as she recognized several women from town, including Mrs. Morrison, the general store owner's wife. They stopped at the edge of the property, not dismounting. "Margaret Donnelly," Mrs. Morrison called, her voice carrying the weight of righteousness. "We've come to appeal to whatever decency remains in you." Margaret forced herself to walk closer, though every instinct screamed at her to hide. "You're living in sin," another woman said bluntly. "Openly, shamelessly, with a heathen savage. Have you no thought for your immortal soul?" "I'm working," Margaret said. "Honestly, there's no sin in honest work." Mrs. Morrison laughed. A cutting sound. "Work? Is that what you call it? We know what kind of work a woman does for a man she's not married to." "It's not like that." "Then marry him," one of the younger women challenged. "If it's all so innocent, make it proper in the eyes of God and man." "Marry an Indian?" Mrs. Morrison looked appalled. That would be even worse. At least now she could repent, leave, try to salvage something of her reputation. "There's nothing left to salvage," Margaret said, surprising herself with the bitterness in her voice. "You all made that clear when I was starving in your streets." "Because you're a woman who couldn't keep her husband," Mrs. Morrison shot back. "That should have been a sign to examine your own failings, not compound them with greater sin." Tom appeared then, stepping out from the cabin where he'd been working. The women's horses shied nervously. "Ladies," he said, his tone polite but cold, "you are not welcome here." "We're trying to save her soul," Mrs. Morrison said, though she backed her horse up slightly. "Her soul is her business. Leave now." "Or what? You'll scalp us?" one of the women said with false bravado. Tom simply looked at her, and she paled. "This isn't over," Mrs. Morrison said. "The decent people of Cedar Ridge won't stand by while white women are corrupted and degraded. We'll pray for you, Margaret. Pray you come to your senses before it's too late." They rode off in a flutter of righteous indignation, leaving Margaret shaking. "Don't listen to them," Tom said. But how could she not? Their words burrowed under her skin like splinters, festering there. That night she barely touched her dinner. The campaign of harassment escalated. Every time Tom went to town, he returned with reports of new rumors, each more vicious than the last. Margaret was a witch who'd enchanted him. She was carrying his half-breed child. She performed depraved acts for food and shelter. Then came the night visits. The first time, it was just voices in the darkness, calling out obscenities. Tom grabbed his rifle, but by the time he got outside, the riders had vanished into the night. The second time, a week later, they threw rocks at the cabin walls, whooping and hollering like devils. One broke the small window, sending glass scattering across the floor. "Ignore them," Tom said as he boarded up the broken window. "They're cowards, only brave in darkness, in groups." But Margaret couldn't ignore them. Each incident wore at her nerves, made her jump at every sound. She found herself constantly watching the tree line, waiting for the next attack. Then came the night that changed everything. Margaret woke to pounding on the door, so violent it shook the entire frame. "Open up," Deputy Bryson's voice. Got a warrant for the woman, suspicion of theft and prostitution. Tom was already up, rifle in hand. No theft here, no prostitution. Go away. Can't do that, Tom. Got legal papers. She comes with us, or we come in and get her. Show papers through window, Tom demanded. Don't need to show you nothing, Indian. Open this door, or we'll break it down. Margaret clutched her shawl around her shoulders, terror making her heart race. Maybe I should go, she whispered. If they have papers. No papers, Tom said firmly. They lie. No judge would sign such warrant without evidence. The pounding intensified. She could hear multiple voices now, at least 4 or 5 men. Last chance, Tom. Send her out and we'll leave peaceful. Keep her, and things get ugly. Tom moved to the window, peering out carefully. Margaret saw his expression harden. They brought rope, he said quietly. The word hit her like a physical blow. Rope. She knew what that meant, what they intended. 10 seconds, Tom. Then we come in. Tom turned to her, and in his eyes she saw something she'd never seen before. Fear. Not for himself, but for her. Back room, he said. Get in back room, bar door. No matter what happens, what you hear, don't come out. Tom, go! She ran for the small back room, barely more than a storage area, and dropped the bar across just as she heard the front door splinter. The sounds that followed would haunt her dreams for years. Crashing, cursing, the meaty sound of fists hitting flesh. Tom's rifle fired once, then she heard it clatter across the floor. More fighting, furniture breaking, then, terrifyingly, silence. Where is she? Bryson's voice, breathless and angry. No response. Hit him again. Make him talk. The sound of a blow, but still Tom said nothing. Margaret pressed her hands over her mouth to stifle a sob. She wanted to go out, to help him, but his words echoed, No matter what happens, don't come out. Check the back room, someone said. Footsteps approached. The handle rattled. Barred from inside, she's in there. Margaret Donnelly, Bryson called. Come out now, and we'll go easy on you. Make us break this door down, and I can't promise what might happen. She said nothing, barely breathing. Your Indian can't protect you now. We got him tied up good, but he's still breathing. You come out peaceful, he stays that way. You make us work for it. He let the threat hang. Margaret closed her eyes. She couldn't let them hurt Tom because of her. Slowly, she reached for the bar. That's when she heard it. A new voice, loud and commanding. What in the name of God Almighty is going on here? Judge Morrison. Bryson sounded suddenly uncertain. Sir, we were just... Breaking and entering, from what I can see. Assault. Did you say you have a warrant? Well, not exactly a warrant, but... Then you're here illegally, attacking a man in his own home. Cut him loose immediately. But, sir, the woman... What woman? I see a man defending his property from criminals. Unless you have legal papers, you're the ones breaking the law here. Margaret heard scrambling, muttered curses. This ain't over, Bryson said. Yes, it is, Judge Morrison replied coldly. Any man I catch out here again without proper legal cause will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Now get out before I have you all arrested. She waited until she heard horses riding away before emerging. Tom sat on the floor, blood running from a cut above his eye, his hands marked with rope burns. Judge Morrison stood in the doorway, an older man with stern features and knowing eyes. You all right, miss? He asked. Margaret nodded, unable to speak, dropping to her knees beside Tom. I'll be going now, the judge said. Tom, you might want to consider making certain arrangements, legal arrangements, would solve a lot of problems. He tipped his hat and left. Margaret cleaned Tom's wounds with shaking hands. I'm sorry, she whispered. This is all my fault. I'll leave tomorrow. No. His hand caught hers. You stay. But they'll come back. They'll keep coming until... Then we face them. Together. She looked at him through tears. This man who owed her nothing had put himself between her and harm, had taken a beating rather than give her up. Why? She asked again. This time, he answered differently. Because you're not nothing, not barn rat, not ruined. You're Margaret. You work hard. You don't complain. You make good coffee. A slight smile. Worth fighting for. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his shoulder, and let herself cry for the first time since arriving at the cabin. Not tears of despair, but of relief. of gratitude, of something that might, possibly, be the beginning of hope. Outside, dawn was breaking. They'd survived the night. Whatever came next, they'd face it, as Tom said, together. The days following the attack were quiet, but it was the quiet of a held breath, of storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Margaret threw herself into work, trying to push away the memory of that terrible night. She found unexpected comfort in the simple routines, preparing meals, mending clothes, learning the skills Tom patiently taught her. He had begun showing her how to work with pelts, how to scrape and stretch them properly. Her first attempts were clumsy, but Tom never criticized, only demonstrated again with those steady hands of his. It was during one of these lessons that she first noticed him carving in the evenings had taken on a new intensity. He would sit by the fire after dinner, knife moving surely over the wood, creating shapes she couldn't quite make out in the flickering light. "What are you making?" she asked one night, curiosity finally overcoming her. He glanced up, then held out the piece. It was a bird, a small sparrow, wings folded, head tucked as if against cold wind. "It's beautiful," she said, running her finger over the delicate feathers he'd carved. "But why a sparrow?" "Small bird, common. People think nothing of it." He took the carving back, studying it. "But survives winter when bigger birds fly south, stronger than it looks." Margaret understood then. He was carving her, or at least how he saw her. The thought made her throat tight with emotion. As the weeks passed, more carvings appeared. A rabbit, alert and ready to run. A deer, graceful despite its wariness. A wolf, lone but proud. He never said they were for her, but she would find them placed carefully near her workspace, by the wash basin, on the shelf near her mending, beside her sleeping pallet. "You could sell these," she said one day, admiring a particularly intricate carving of an eagle. "In town, or to traders passing through." Tom shrugged. "Maybe. Not why I make them." "Then why?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "My grandfather taught me. Said the wood holds spirits, waiting. Carver's job is to find them, free them." He looked at her directly. Sometimes person needs to see their own spirit outside themselves. Remember what they are. That night, Margaret studied the collection of carvings by firelight. Each one different, but all sharing a quality of quiet strength, of endurance. Was this how Tom saw her? Not as the broken, shameful creature the town believed her to be, but as something worthy of patience and careful attention. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Margaret was working in the small garden plot Tom had helped her clear of snow when she heard a horse approaching. Her body tensed, ready to run for the cabin, but it was only one rider, a woman. She recognized her as Helen Baker, the school teacher, younger than most of the town matrons, perhaps 30, with a plain but kind face. "Miss Donnelly," Helen called, not dismounting. "May I speak with you?" Margaret approached cautiously. "If you've come to save my soul or convince me to leave, I've come to apologize," Helen interrupted. "And to warn you." This was unexpected. Margaret studied the other woman's face, looking for deception but found only sincerity and what looked like fear. "Warn me about what?" Helen glanced around nervously. "May we speak inside? I don't want to be seen here too long." Margaret hesitated, then nodded. They went into the cabin and she poured coffee for them both. "I was there," Helen said without preamble. "The day you came to town. I saw you begging for work, saw how they treated you. I said nothing, did nothing. I've regretted it every day since." "Why didn't you help then?" Helen's hands twisted in her lap. "Because I'm a coward, because I need my position. A school teacher who shows poor judgment, who associates with the wrong people, they'd dismiss me in a heartbeat. And then I'd be where you are." Margaret felt a flash of anger, but pushed it down. She understood too well the fear of losing respectability, of sliding from barely acceptable to outcast. "You said you came to warn me," she prompted. "Yes." Helen leaned forward. "There's talk in town, ugly talk. Some of the men, led by Deputy Bryson, they're saying Tom has you under some kind of Indian spell, that you're not responsible for your actions. They're petitioning the territorial judge to have you removed for your own good." Judge Morrison already told them. Judge Morrison is only here twice a month. The rest of the time, Bryson and his friends do as they please, and they're getting more people on their side. Even some who didn't care before are starting to listen. They're saying it's about protecting white womanhood, about Christian values. Margaret felt cold despite the warm coffee in her hands. "What should I do?" "I don't know," Helen admitted. "But I thought you should know what's coming, and—" She hesitated, then pulled a small cloth bundle from her bag. "I brought this. It's not much, but—" Margaret opened it to find needles, good thread, a small pair of scissors, and several yards of decent fabric. "I can't accept, please." Helen stood abruptly. "It doesn't make up for my cowardice, but maybe it helps a little. I should go before someone sees my horse." At the door, she paused. "He's a good man, your Tom. I've watched him trade in town for years. Never cheats, never causes trouble despite how they treat him. You could do worse than a man who sees your worth when the rest of the world doesn't." After she left, Margaret sat staring at the sewing supplies. Such a small kindness, but it reminded her that not everyone in Cedar Ridge was against her. It gave her an idea. When Tom returned from checking his trap lines, she showed him the fabric. "I want to make something," she said. "Something to sell. If I could bring in money, real money, maybe they'd see I'm not just what they think I am." Tom studied her face. "You want their approval?" "I want them to leave us alone," she corrected. "And money talks louder than gossip." He nodded slowly. "What would you make?" "Shirts, proper ones. The men in town, their wives don't all sew well. I noticed when I was there, mended tears, crooked seams. I can do better." It was true. Her mother had insisted she learn fine needlework, back when she'd had hopes of Margaret marrying well. The skill had seemed useless then. Now it might be salvation. Tom helped her set up a proper workspace near the window where the light was best. As she worked on the first shirt, he sat nearby, carving. This time she could see what he was making. A woman bent over sewing, captured in a moment of concentration. "That's me," she said, surprised. "Yes, I don't look afraid." "Because you're not. Not when you work. When you work, you remember who you are." She thought about this as her needle flashed in and out of the fabric. He was right. When she was working, she wasn't the abandoned wife, the beggar, the fallen woman. She was just Margaret, creating something useful with her own hands. As evening fell, she finished the first shirt. It was good work, straight seams, even stitching, well fitted. Tom examined it with the same careful attention he gave his own work. "Good," he said simply, but she could see approval in his eyes. That night, as they ate dinner, Margaret found herself thinking about Judge Morrison's words. "Legal arrangements," he'd said. She knew what he meant. Marriage would protect her legally, make it harder for Bryson and his friends to interfere. But marriage to an Apache? The thought should have horrified her. Months ago it would have. Now. She looked at Tom as he tended the fire, watched his careful movements, the quiet strength in everything he did, remembered his body blocking the door against intruders, his refusal to give her up even when they beat him. "Tom," she said suddenly, "what did Judge Morrison mean? About legal arrangements?" He was still for a moment, then turned to face her. "You know what he meant." "Yes, but is it even legal? For us to—" "Legal, yes. Accepted, no." He sat back down across from her. "Would cause more problems, maybe. Or solve them. Hard to know. What do you think?" He was quiet for a long time, carving knife still in his hands. "I think you deserve man who offers marriage because he wants you, not because law says it's smart." Margaret felt heat rise in her cheeks. "And you don't want—" "Didn't say that." His dark eyes met hers. "Said you deserve better than marriage for protection only." The air between them seemed to thicken. Margaret realized suddenly how aware she'd become of him. The way he moved, the rare smiles that transformed his serious face, the gentleness of his hands despite their strength. "What if it wasn't just for protection?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom set down his carving, giving her his full attention. Then would be different question. Before she could respond, they heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. Tom was on his feet instantly, reaching for his rifle. "Stay inside," he ordered, moving to the window. but Margaret recognized the voice that called out, "Deputy Bryson again," and he wasn't alone. "We know you're in there. Both of you. Come out now, and nobody gets hurt." Tom checked his rifle, his face grim. "They don't learn." "Wait," Margaret said, an idea forming. "Let me try something." She grabbed the shirt she'd just finished and moved to the door before Tom could stop her. "I'm coming out," she called. "Don't shoot. I'm coming out to talk." She opened the door and stepped onto the porch, holding the shirt up like a flag of truce. In the torchlight, she could see at least 8 men, including Bryson and several town merchants. "Gentlemen," she said, proud when her voice didn't shake, "I have a business proposition." The men sat on their horses, torches casting dancing shadows across their faces. Deputy Bryson's expression shifted from triumphant to confused as Margaret stood before them, holding up the carefully made shirt. "Business?" Bryson spat. "The only business we have is removing you from this den of sin." "Look at this shirt," Margaret said, ignoring his words. She stepped forward into the torchlight so they could see better. "Look at the stitching, the cut, the quality." Despite themselves, several of the men leaned forward. She recognized Samuel Hart, who owned the feed store, and Marcus Webb, the blacksmith. "So, you can sew," Bryson said dismissively. "What of it?" "How many of you have wives who struggle with fine needlework?" Margaret pressed on. "How many of you pay premium prices to order shirts from Denver or San Francisco? I can make better, faster, and cheaper." "We don't need nothing from you," one man called out. But Samuel Hart was examining the shirt with a merchant's eye. "That is fine work," he admitted grudgingly. "I'm offering to take orders," Margaret continued. "Proper business arrangements. You need quality clothing. I need honest work. Nothing more." "She's trying to trick us," Bryson insisted. "Distract us from why we're here." "Which is what, exactly?" Tom's voice came from behind her. He stood in the doorway, rifle held casually but ready. "You have legal papers this time." Bryson's face darkened. "Don't need papers to protect a white woman from corruption." "I'm not corrupted," Margaret said firmly. "I'm employed. I work for room and board, and now I'm offering to work for wages." "Since when is honest labor a sin?" "Since you're living in sin with a heathen," someone shouted. Margaret felt her temper flare. For weeks she'd cowered, accepted their judgment, let shame eat at her. But standing here, holding proof of her skill, with Tom solid and steady behind her, something shifted. "You know what's a sin?" she said, her voice rising. "Letting a woman starve in your streets because her husband abandoned her. Turning away someone begging for work because she doesn't have a man's name to make her respectable. That's the real corruption. Your hearts are so hard you'd rather see me dead than helped by someone you consider beneath you." "Watch your tongue, woman," Bryson warned. "Or what? You'll drag me away, beat me like you beat Tom. Show everyone what good Christian men you are." She laughed bitterly. "You call him savage, but he showed me more humanity in one day than your whole town managed in a week." "Margaret." Tom's quiet voice held a warning. She was pushing too hard, risking violence. But Marcus Webb had dismounted, approaching slowly. "Let me see that shirt closer." Margaret handed it to him, watching as he examined it by torchlight. Webb was known for being practical, caring more about quality than gossip. "This is better than what my wife makes," he admitted. "And better than what we can get from the traveling merchants." "How much?" "Marcus, you can't be serious," Bryson protested. "I need shirts," Webb said bluntly. "Good ones for church and business. If she can make them, I don't care where she sleeps." $2 per shirt, Margaret said. $1 for simpler work shirts. "That's Denver prices," Hart protested. "For Denver quality," Margaret countered. "And faster delivery." A murmur ran through the group. These were merchants, businessmen. They understood profit and loss better than moral absolutes. "This is madness," Bryson said. "You're all being fooled. She's a woman of loose morals and he—" "A man who pays his debts and keeps his word," Webb interrupted. "Which is more than some white men in this town can say." The tension crackled between the men. Margaret realized she was witnessing a split in the group, those driven by prejudice and those driven by practicality. "I'll take 2 shirts," Webb announced. "1 black for church, 1 gray for business." "Marcus!" Bryson's voice was incredulous. "It's business, Bryson. Nothing more." Webb turned to Margaret. When can you have them ready? 2 weeks, Margaret said, hardly believing what was happening. I might be interested too, Hart said slowly, if the quality's as good as it looks. This is a mistake, Bryson said coldly. You're encouraging sin, normalizing the abnormal. What next? We let Indians marry our daughters? Nobody's talking about marriage, Webb said impatiently. We're talking about shirts. But Bryson wasn't finished. He turned his horse to face Margaret directly. You think you're clever, but this changes nothing. You're still living in sin, still a stain on our community. One way or another, we'll see you gone. That's enough. A new voice joined the conversation. Judge Morrison rode into the torchlight, and Margaret wondered how long he'd been listening in the darkness. Deputy Bryson, are you threatening these people? Judge, Bryson straightened. We're just concerned citizens, who seem to have forgotten that harassment is illegal, regardless of your personal opinions. The judge's voice was steel. Mr. Webb wants to commission some shirts. Mr. Hart is considering the same. That's commerce, not corruption. But she's living with, as far as I can see, Miss Donnelly is employed as a housekeeper and seamstress, unless you have evidence of illegal activity. I suggest you leave these people to their business. Bryson's face was ugly with rage, but he couldn't openly defy the judge. This isn't over, he said, echoing his usual threat. No, it's not, Judge Morrison agreed pleasantly. Because if I hear of any more midnight raids on this property, I'll be filing charges. Are we clear? The group began to disperse, Webb promising to return in daylight with specific measurements and requirements. As they rode away, Judge Morrison lingered. That was cleverly done, Miss Donnelly, he said. But Bryson's right about one thing. This isn't over. He'll find other ways to cause trouble. Then what should we do? Margaret asked. The judge glanced between her and Tom. What I suggested before still stands. Legal protection has its advantages. He touched his hat. Good evening to you both. After he left, Margaret and Tom stood in the doorway, watching the torchlights disappear into the darkness. You took big risk, Tom said finally. I'm tired of being afraid, Margaret replied. Tired of letting them make me feel ashamed for surviving. He was quiet for a moment. You spoke well, like warrior. I didn't feel like a warrior. I was terrified. Best warriors are. Fear makes careful. Careful keeps alive. They went back inside, the cabin feeling safer now, as if her defiance had strengthened its walls. Margaret picked up the fabric Helen had brought, already planning the shirts she would make. Will they really let me work? She asked. Or will Bryson find a way to stop it? Some will trade, Tom said. Men like Webb care about quality, profit, others. He shrugged. Bryson feeds on hate, won't stop easy. Margaret fingered the fabric, thinking. Tom, about what the judge said, about legal protection. He looked at her steadily. You want protection? I want. She paused, trying to find the right words. When I stood up to them tonight, you were behind me, not speaking for me, not protecting me like I'm weak, just there, solid. Sure. She met his eyes. I've never had that before. Someone who believes I'm strong enough to fight but stands ready if I need them. You are strong enough, Tom said simply. Knew it when I saw you in town. Beaten down but not broken. Like bird with wounded wing. Needs time to heal, then flies again. Is that why you helped me? Because you saw something worth saving? No. He moved closer, his dark eyes intense. Helped because it was right. Stayed because... He paused, seeming to struggle with words. Because you don't look at me and see Savage. You see Tom. And you don't look at me and see a ruined woman. You see Margaret. Not ruined, he said firmly. Never ruined. Hurt, yes. Lost for a time, but not ruined. Gold doesn't ruin when fire tests it. Comes out pure. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. I'm not gold, Tom. I'm just me. Yes, he agreed. Just Margaret. That's enough. More than enough. The space between them seemed charged with possibility. Margaret thought about the judge's suggestion again, but now with different considerations. Not just legal protection, but partnership. Not just shelter, but home. If we... She started, then stopped. If we married, it wouldn't just be for protection, not for me. Tom was very still. What would it be for? For mornings working side by side, for evenings by the fire, for someone who sees me truly and doesn't turn away. She took a breath. For love, though I hardly dare use that word yet. Love grows, Tom said quietly, like plants in garden, needs tending, patience, time. But roots already there, waiting for spring. It wasn't a declaration of passion, but somehow it was better, a promise of possibility, of something that could flourish if given the chance. Is that a yes? Margaret asked, a smile tugging at her lips. Is that proper proposal? Tom countered, and she was delighted to see an answering smile on his usually serious face. I suppose it's not, she admitted. How do the Apache propose? Different ways, but always with gift. Something made or hunted or grown. Shows ability to provide. Margaret looked around the cabin, at the pelts from his hunting, the vegetables from his garden, the carvings he'd made. Then she looked down at the shirt in her hands. Then I'll make you something, she decided. The finest shirt in the territory. And when it's finished, I'll ask properly. Tom nodded, accepting this. I will answer properly. They stood there, two people who had found each other at the edges of society, discovering that the margins could be a place not of exile, but of unexpected freedom. Outside, the night was full of threats and judgment, but inside, there was warmth, work, and the quiet understanding that some things broken could indeed be mended, made stronger at the seams. Margaret picked up her needle and began to plan. She would make Webb's shirts, prove her worth as a tradeswoman. But first, she would make Tom's shirt. Every stitch a promise, every seam a declaration that she was no longer running, no longer hiding, no longer ashamed. She was exactly where she belonged. The November wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows Tom had reinforced with extra boards. For 3 days the storm had raged, turning the world outside into a white void. Margaret worked by lamplight, her fingers steady on the fine linen she'd purchased with her first earnings from Webb's shirts. Tom's shirt was nearly complete. She'd spent hours on each seam, ensuring every stitch was perfect. It was the finest work she'd ever done. A man's shirt that managed to be both practical and elegant, with subtle details that spoke of care and attention. Storm's getting worse, Tom said, adding more wood to the fire. Ice crystals clung to his hair from his brief venture outside to check the animals. Margaret looked up from her work. We have enough supplies? Yes, plan for this. He sat down across from her, picking up the piece of antler he'd been carving. Early storm, but not unexpected. They'd grown comfortable with silence, but this was different. A warm, companionable quiet that wrapped around them like another blanket. Margaret found herself stealing glances at Tom as she worked, noting how the firelight played across his features, how his hands moved with such precision over the antler. What are you making? She asked. He held it up. Hair comb, for wedding gift. Margaret's needle stilled. Whose wedding? His eyes met hers, dark and steady. Ours, when you ask properly. Heat rose in her cheeks, but she smiled. Presumptuous of you. Practical, he corrected. Storm gives time to make ready. They worked in companionable silence as the wind shrieked outside. Margaret finished the last buttonhole on Tom's shirt, then held it up to examine. It was beautiful, the kind of shirt a successful merchant might wear, or a judge, made for a man who deserved respect. It's finished, she said softly. Tom set aside his carving and came to look. His fingers traced the collar, the cuffs, examining her work with the same attention he gave to everything important. Very fine, he said. Too fine for me. No. Margaret stood, holding the shirt up against him. Just right for you, for the man who gave me shelter when the world turned its back. Who taught me I wasn't ruined, just tested? Who sees me as Margaret, not as what others name me? The wind gusted particularly hard, and they both looked toward the door as something crashed outside, likely a tree branch. We should, Tom began, but stopped as they heard something else. Voices, faint but unmistakable over the storm. He grabbed his rifle immediately. Stay back! But Margaret recognized the voice calling out. That's Helen, the school teacher. Tom cautiously opened the door. Helen Baker stumbled in, half frozen, supporting another woman Margaret didn't recognize. Younger, heavily pregnant, and barely conscious. Please, Helen gasped. She needs help. The baby! It's coming!" They moved quickly. Tom carried the pregnant woman to Margaret's pallet by the fire, while Margaret helped Helen out of her frozen cloak. "What happened?" Margaret asked, grabbing blankets. "This is Sarah Whitman, Reverend Whitman's daughter. She was cast out." Helen's teeth chattered. "Her husband died last month in a mining accident. When her father learned she was with child, he said she must have sinned before marriage. Threw her out." Margaret felt a cold anger. The same Reverend who had refused her shelter. "I've been hiding her," Helen continued. "But she went into labor. I couldn't deliver a baby alone, and no one in town would help. They said she made her choices. I remembered. I thought you wouldn't turn us away." "You thought right," Margaret said firmly. "Tom, we need hot water, clean cloths." As Tom moved to help, Sarah's eyes fluttered open. "No," she moaned. "Can't scandal ruin you too." "Hush," Margaret said gently. "You're safe here. We're going to help you and your baby." The hours that followed were intense. Margaret had helped with births before, back in her old life, but never in such circumstances. The storm raged outside, while inside, another kind of storm played out as Sarah labored. Helen proved surprisingly steady, following Margaret's instructions without question. Tom kept the fire high, water hot, and stood ready to help when needed. His calm presence seemed to anchor them all. "I'm scared," Sarah whispered between contractions. "We're here," Margaret assured her. "You're not alone. They said I'm cursed, that the baby will be marked by sin. The only marks your baby will have are the ones from being loved," Margaret said fiercely. "Anyone who says otherwise is a fool." As dawn approached, with the storm finally beginning to ease, Sarah's son entered the world, healthy, perfect, and loud. "He's beautiful," Helen breathed as Margaret cleaned the baby and wrapped him in soft cloths. Sarah wept as she held her son. "I have nothing, no home, no family, no way to care for him." Margaret looked at Tom, silent communication passing between them. He nodded slightly. "You have shelter here as long as you need," Margaret said. "The barn's warm and dry. We can fix it up proper. You're a widow, not a sinner. Your boy deserves a chance. But people will talk. They'll say terrible things about you for helping me." "They already say terrible things," Margaret replied. "Hasn't killed us yet." Helen watched this exchange with wonder. "You do that? Take in a stranger and her baby?" "Someone took me in when I was a stranger," Margaret said, glancing at Tom. "Seems only right to pass on the kindness." They spent the day making arrangements. Tom and Helen worked to create a comfortable space in the barn. It was well built, warm, and could be made quite livable. Margaret tended to Sarah and the baby, making sure both were recovering well. As evening fell, Helen prepared to leave. "I have to get back before they notice I'm gone," she said. "But I'll come when I can, bring supplies." "Be careful," Margaret warned. "If they find out you helped, then I'll face the consequences." Helen's chin lifted. "I'm tired of being a coward. Watching you stand up to them, make a life despite their judgment, it's inspired me." After she left, Margaret found Tom standing outside, studying the storm damage. "Big decision, taking them in," he said. "Are you angry? I should have asked first." "Not angry." He turned to her. "Proud. You see need, you help. Like I did. We'll have a full household," Margaret said. "A cast-out widow, her baby, an Apache man, and a fallen woman. What will people say? Let them talk." Tom's rare smile appeared. "We know truth. Good people helping each other, nothing shameful in that." That night, as Sarah and her baby slept safely in the barn, Margaret and Tom sat by their fire. The storm had passed, leaving the world clean and white outside. "I have something for you," Margaret said, retrieving the shirt she'd made. "My proposal gift." Tom took it solemnly, examining every detail. "This is very fine work of a woman who takes pride in what she makes." "Work of a woman who takes pride in who it's for," Margaret corrected. He set the shirt aside carefully, then retrieved his own gift, the antler comb, now finished. It was beautiful, carved with delicate flowers and vines, polished until it gleamed. "For your hair," he said, "when we stand before Judge." Margaret took it with trembling hands. "It's beautiful." "You haven't asked question yet," Tom reminded her. Margaret set down the comb and took his hands. They were calloused from work, but gentle in their touch. "Tom Crowfeather," she said formally, "will you marry me? Not for protection, not for propriety, but because you've shown me that broken things can be mended, because you see me truly and don't turn away, because I want to face whatever comes with you beside me." "Yes," he said simply. "We'll marry you, Margaret Donnelly, because you are strong like mountain, because you see Tom, not Apache, because winter is warmer with you here." They sat quietly, hands linked, as the fire crackled. Outside, they could hear Sarah's baby cry briefly, then settle. New life in the midst of winter. Hope in the midst of hardship. "When?" Margaret asked. "Soon, before more storms come. Judge Morrison returns next week. People will be furious. Bryson, the others, they'll cause trouble." "Yes," Tom agreed. "But we face together. You, me, Sarah, her boy. Make our own family. Our own way." Margaret thought about the unlikely household they were creating. Outcasts all, but stronger together than apart. She thought about the townspeople's horror when they learned not only was she marrying Tom, but they were sheltering another fallen woman and her child. "Let them rage," she said finally. "We'll be too busy living to notice." Tom squeezed her hands gently. "This is good decision. No regrets?" "No regrets," Margaret assured him. "Only gratitude for the storm that brought me to your door, for your kindness that saved my life, for this chance to build something new." The wind had died completely now, leaving perfect stillness. Tomorrow would bring challenges, Sarah's needs, the town's reaction, wedding preparations. But tonight, in the warmth of their cabin, with new life sleeping nearby and promises exchanged, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in so long. Peace. She was no longer running, no longer ashamed, no longer alone. She was home, and soon she would be wife to a man who valued her strength as much as her skills, who offered partnership instead of possession. The storm had passed, but what it left behind was not destruction but transformation, a makeshift family forged in hardship, bound by choice rather than blood, stronger for having weathered the tempest together. Dawn broke cold and clear on Margaret's wedding day. She stood at the window, watching the sun paint the snow-covered mountains gold. In 3 days, everything had changed. Word of their impending marriage had spread through Cedar Ridge like wildfire, and the response had been swift and predictable. "They're coming," Tom said quietly from behind her. She could see them now, a group of riders approaching through the morning mist. Deputy Bryson led them, accompanied by Reverend Whitman and several other men from town. "How many?" she asked. 12, maybe 15. Sarah emerged from the barn, her baby wrapped tightly against the cold. "I should leave. This is because of me, too." "You stay," Margaret said firmly. "We face them together." Tom checked his rifle, then set it aside. "No guns. Not today." Margaret understood. Today was meant for joining, not violence. She straightened her dress, not the fine white gown she'd once dreamed of, but the good wool dress Tom had bought her, clean and mended with her own careful stitches. The riders stopped at the edge of the property. Bryson dismounted, his face twisted with righteous anger. "Margaret Donnelly," he called. "We've come to give you one last chance to see reason." Margaret stepped onto the porch, Tom beside her, Sarah slightly behind. "State your business, deputy." "You know our business. This abomination cannot proceed. Bad enough you're living in sin, but now you want to make it legal? Mix your blood with his? And harboring the Reverend's wayward daughter? Have you no shame?" Reverend Whitman pushed forward. "Sarah, come home. Repent your sins. Give the child to a proper family, and all can be forgiven." "There's nothing to forgive," Sarah said, her voice stronger than Margaret had yet heard it. "I was married before God. My son was conceived in wedlock. You cast me out for your own pride, not God's law." "Silence." Whitman's face purpled. "You dare. I dare speak truth," Sarah interrupted. "Something you've forgotten how to do." "Enough," Bryson said. "We've not come to argue theology. Margaret Donnelly, will you abandon this madness?" Margaret felt Tom's solid presence beside her, Sarah's quiet courage behind her. She thought of all the cold nights, the closed doors, the turned backs. Then she thought of warmth, acceptance, dignity restored. "No," she said simply. "I will not." "Then you force our hand." Bryson gestured to his men. "We'll take you by force if necessary. For your own good. Try it." A new voice entered the conversation. Judge Morrison rode into view, but he wasn't alone. With him were Marcus Webb, Samuel Hart, and, surprisingly, Helen Baker. Behind them, a wagon driven by an elderly woman Margaret didn't recognize. "Gentlemen," the judge said pleasantly, "I heard there might be trouble this morning. Thought I'd come early for the wedding." "What wedding?" Bryson snarled. "You can't seriously mean to—" "I can and I will," Judge Morrison said. "The law is clear. Any man and woman of legal age can marry, regardless of race. You may not like it, Deputy, but your likes and dislikes don't supersede the law." "It's unnatural," someone shouted. "Against God's plan." "Strange," the elderly woman said, climbing down from the wagon with Helen's help. "I've been reading the Bible for 70 years, and I don't recall God asking for our opinion on his plans." Margaret recognized her now, Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the widow who lived on the town's outskirts, known for her sharp tongue and sharper mind. "Mrs. Hartwell," Reverend Whitman said carefully, "surely you don't approve." "Of what? A woman choosing marriage over starvation? A man showing Christian charity when Christians wouldn't?" she snorted. "Seems to me the only thing unnatural here is how cruel people can be while claiming God's name." "This is ridiculous," Bryson said. "Marcus, Samuel, you can't support this." Webb shrugged. "I came for a wedding, also to pick up my shirts. Business is business." "And I brought fabric," Hart added. "Figured Miss Margaret, soon to be Mrs. Crowfeather, might want to expand her seamstress work." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. Not everyone from town had come to condemn. Some had come to support, or at least to profit. It was more than she'd dared hope. "You'll all regret this," Bryson warned. "When their half-breed children are running wild, when moral decay spreads through our community." "The only decay I see," Judge Morrison interrupted, "is in hearts that choose hate over humanity. Now, unless you have legal grounds to prevent this marriage, I suggest you leave. The ceremony will proceed at noon." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Bryson's hand twitched toward his gun, and Margaret saw Tom tense beside her. Then Mrs. Hartwell spoke again. "Seems to me, Deputy, that you're outnumbered. Not in guns, maybe, but in conscience. Do you really want to be the man who started a bloodbath over a wedding?" Slowly, reluctantly, Bryson backed down. "This isn't over," he said, the familiar threat sounding hollow now. "We'll be watching. One sign of trouble, one hint that he's reverting to savage ways." "You'll do nothing," Judge Morrison said coldly, "unless you want to face charges for harassment and attempted intimidation of a federal judge. I've been patient with your prejudices, Deputy, but my patience has limits." The group of riders milled uncertainly, then began to disperse. Reverend Whitman cast one last look at his daughter, holding her baby in the doorway of the barn. "You're dead to me," he said flatly. "I've been dead to you since you chose pride over love," Sarah replied. "But I'm alive here, Father, more alive than I ever was under your roof." He turned without another word and rode away. As the dust settled, Margaret found herself surrounded by the most unlikely wedding party imaginable. Mrs. Hartwell was already taking charge, directing Helen to help prepare a wedding breakfast. Webb and Hart were discussing business with Tom, treating him with the same matter-of-fact manner they'd use with any supplier. "Well," Judge Morrison said, "shall we proceed? I believe you have vows to exchange." The ceremony was simple, held in the main room of the cabin. Margaret wore Tom's gift, the carved comb, in her hair. Tom wore the shirt she'd made him. Sarah stood as witness, her baby peaceful in her arms. Helen was there, risking her position to support them. Mrs. Hartwell sat in the best chair, nodding approvingly. "Do you, Margaret Donnelly, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Judge Morrison asked. "I do," Margaret said, her voice clear and certain. "Do you, Tom Crowfeather, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." Tom's deep voice filled the small space. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you husband and wife." Tom kissed her gently, a promise more than passion. and Margaret felt something settle deep in her chest. Not just safety, not just shelter, but belonging. The wedding breakfast was simple but joyful. Mrs. Hartwell regaled them with stories of the town's early days, when survival mattered more than skin color. Webb and Hart conducted their business, ordering more shirts and even some leather work from Tom. Helen held Sarah's baby while Sarah ate, the first real meal she'd had in days. As the sun reached its peak, the guests prepared to leave. "There will be talk," Helen warned. "Consequences." "There always are," Margaret said. "But we'll manage." Mrs. Hartwell pressed a small purse into Margaret's hands. "Wedding gift, and an order for 2 winter dresses. My arthritis makes sewing difficult these days." "Thank you," Margaret whispered, overwhelmed. "Don't thank me. Just live well. That's the best revenge against small minds. Living well despite them." After the guests departed, Margaret and Tom stood together in their doorway, watching the sun paint the mountains again, this time in shades of rose and gold. "No regrets?" Tom asked. "None," Margaret assured him. "You?" "Only one." At her alarmed look, he smiled. "Should have married you sooner." She laughed, leaning into his solid warmth. Sarah emerged from the barn with the baby, joining them in the doorway. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked. "Now we work," Margaret said. "We build. We prove them wrong. Not with words, but with lives well lived." "And the house?" Tom added quietly. Margaret looked at him in surprise. "What house?" He pointed to a flat area near the cabin. "Spring comes, we build. Bigger house, room for family." He glanced at Sarah and the baby. All family. Margaret felt tears slip down her cheeks. From begging to sleep in barns to planning a proper house, from cast out and shamed to married and respected, at least by some, from alone to surrounded by chosen family. "Yes," she said, "we build." As darkness fell on her wedding day, Margaret Crowfeather, for that was her name now, claimed with pride, sat by the fire with her husband, their makeshift family nearby. Outside, the world might rage against their choices, but inside, there was warmth, purpose, and hope. She'd asked for work and shelter, nothing more. She'd received that and so much else: dignity, love, a future. The barn she'd begged to sleep in stood transformed into Sarah's haven. The cabin that had been her sanctuary would soon grow into a proper home. "Mercy is not sin," she murmured, remembering her own words from that night weeks ago. "Fire is not shame." "No," Tom agreed, understanding. "They are beginning of life, real life." And so it was. In the margins of society, in defiance of prejudice and judgment, a family was born not of blood, but of choice. A place where the cast out found welcome, where strength was measured in kindness rather than conformity, where love transcended the boundaries others had drawn. The fire crackled, the baby cooed, and Margaret Crowfeather smiled. She was home. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect with listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Margaret and Tom's journey. What touched your heart the most? Let us know in the comments.